And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 106, we're joined by Karen Dahl. Karen Dahl is a psychologist and a coach by trade and training. And this conversation is going to be around a book that she published in 2022 called Building Psychological Fitness, certainly a title that will resonate with our audience. And this is a book about how high performers achieve with ease. And the conversation we're going to have has lessons for both the individual professionals that listen to this podcast, as well as the clients and the patients that we work with. And I think one of the things that's going to become very clear in this discussion is the importance of tending to and taking care of our psychological fitness in a very similar fashion to what we take care of our physical fitness. And again, all of us that listen to this obviously greatly value physical fitness. And I believe we value psychological fitness as well, but sometimes we don't think of them from the same perspective. And so I hope that's what this conversation leaves you with. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 106. Please enjoy this conversation with Karen Dahl. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Karen Dahl. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So I'm super excited for this conversation because, although we are a fitness and a wellness podcast, obviously a big component to that, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, is the psychological aspect. And, more and more as the research comes out, we realize that, really intrinsic ties between, psychology and fitness. And so whenever we have a chance to have one of these discussions, I'm always excited. And Karen, we're going to spend some time talking about your book today. But before we dive into this discussion on your book, why don't you just give us a little bit of an idea of your background to provide some context for the conversation around the book?
Great. So I'm based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm a psychologist. So I've been a psychologist for 25, 6-ish years. And my focus has always been in the workplace. And so I say that I've always been involved in fostering mental health at work. I just haven't been able to call it that until the last few years. So my background is that I've done a lot of leadership development and assessment and coaching. And then in the last probably 5 years, I've leaned much more into fostering mental health awareness at work and helping people with burnout, work with a lot of high achievers. And during COVID, I just began having this energy around and tension around feeling really sad about how people are struggling. Yeah. And I was hearing during my coaching calls, I even counted one morning how many times I heard the word struggle, and it was like 27 times. People talking about their struggle, they're overwhelmed, there was such uncertainty, and people were still just feeling really alone in their experience. And so that's where I got the energy to write the book, is just as one more channel and mechanism and way for information to be accessible. And to try to present it in a way that people could tolerate, which is why I came up with psychological fitness, because when we talk about mental health, there's still stigma and people get confused about what's mental illness and mental health. And when I was researching for the title of my book, and I was looking at options using the words mental health, there were plenty of people that said, "Oh, that doesn't apply to me." So, we're making progress on a whole person being, like we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. We're not healthy or not.
Yeah.
I'm mostly physically healthy, but I do have some ailments and challenges, but I don't have a disease. I don't have pathology, and, same with mental health. So I just operate out of that whole person continuum model. And so that was kind of a long answer to your question, but that's just a bit about my background and kind of what informs me. So I've been trying to just get the word out, make mental health more mainstream. And I hope that, we can be talking about our mental fitness just like we talk about our physical fitness.
Indeed. And, no more important time. We've all seen and read the statistics of, the mental health crisis, that exists in this country. There's not enough mental health providers for all the people that need to be seen, mental health professionals. I mean, it's a real problem. And, it's interesting that, you come at this from the organizational perspective, because, burnout is a very real thing, particularly, in the healthcare space. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast are involved in healthcare, either directly or indirectly. And it's a challenging time. Resources are constrained and people are having to do more. And so we often sometimes don't always think of taking care of ourselves first, but it's the putting on your own oxygen mask and making sure that you take care of yourself so you can take care of other people is important. And I think, we're going to take this discussion in kind of two directions. One is, what should our listeners who are professionals, what should they be doing to ensure that they can flourish and be mentally healthy? But also, how can they apply these lessons to the people that they work with on a day-by-day basis? So let's get into this on a high level before we start to apply it, and talk about the framework that you put together in the book. Walk us through a little bit about what we need to know in terms of building our psychological fitness from your perspective.
Yes, great. And so essentially, my book is just a big research book, resource book. And I tried to include interventions that are all science-backed and evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
And the model basically is just reminding us that we have agency over our well-being and our mental health. Mm-hmm. And so you use the word flourishing, and I love that. And the workplace happens to be the channel that I utilize. I mean, you can try to tap the educational system or healthcare or the government, and the workplace is just the system in which I try to promote the message. So, I mean, at a high level, really, my hope is to get as many people as possible out of that red zone of struggle and strain and suffering, and move us into the zones of thriving and flourishing, and to prevent people in the middle from sliding into the red zone. And so the framework is basically this idea that we have agency. I use these ACE pillars, mm-hmm. ACE, which is the need to take action and take steps, that we have agency over how, like, levers we can pull to enhance our well-being and mental health, and connecting with people and doing it with others is important. Uh-huh. And the idea of empowerment. The idea of empowerment, again, is just that we have some agency and we can be proactive, whether it's looking at prevention or the proactivity to generate additional mental health and flourishing. And I believe the workplace should be a source of well-being and a source of flourishing, not something that damages our well-being. So the idea is we can train for physical fitness. We can also train for psychological fitness. And we know that the components of any sort of personal change or self-development are that change works. We can change with small steps over time, with follow-up, mm-hmm. and accountability.
Yeah, you mentioned the red zone. And, I think people understand, mental illness. But I don't think sometimes people are aware of maybe when they're in that zone of when they're languishing, or, whatever word you want to use. What are some things that, people who are listening can pay attention to see if, maybe they need to be more aware of their psychological fitness deteriorating?
Yes. So there are all kinds of mental health continuum models. I have one that I put in my book, but there are That's not proprietary. There are many different ways to look at that illness wellness model. But really taking inventory and having some time to reflect on, number one, like the fundamental health practices. So, we all know plenty of the things that we should be doing that we don't do, or shouldn't be doing that we still do. So looking at the foundation of, we need to be getting sleep and hydrating and getting exercise and drinking water and connecting with people. So all of that, but then also really understanding how to do a deeper dive to check in with ourselves on, how is my mood? How is the quality of my thinking? It's very easy, if we're triggered or experiencing fear or anxiety, to get into thinking traps. How do I understand how to regulate my emotions? How do I foster emotional literacy so that I understand my feelings? Because our emotions are signals. They're important. They're not necessarily facts. So we want to look at them, but have a little bit of space between our relationship with our thoughts and feelings, so that we're having a right-sized response to the situation. So I would just say, checking in with ourselves. How am I feeling? What's my attitude? What level of engagement am I having at work? Where's my energy level? What are energy boosters in my life? What are energy drainers in my life? Like, these are all just different threads that we can appraise and assess to check in with ourselves.
Check in with ourselves, I think, is so important, because we are all so busy and we're all so distracted, and we check in with a lot of people in our life, but I feel as if many times the day goes by and we probably spend not as much time checking in with ourselves as was what we need to. So I think that awareness piece is really important.
Yes, and if you think of, the components of health, is, if we think of our physical health, our emotional health, our cognitive health, our spiritual health, like, these are all planes in which we can figure out where is a gap. Is it an acute problem? Or where is there opportunity that I can generate, or, move further into the zone of health in any of those categories and vectors. And the pause, that taking time to reflect and pause, it's a step that's very often overlooked, and we're given such messages of hustle and be more productive and hurriness, that it's really easy to forget. It's easy to do, but it's also easy to not do.
Yeah. So in terms of the model that you present in the book, let's first talk to the professionals that are listening to this podcast, that are trying to excel in their career. They're trying to make people healthier. How would you recommend that they apply that to the model that you present to their own careers? What can we pick out of the book as some really important lessons that people can consider and start implementing?
Well, when we think about the idea, like the paradigm of energy management, which tends to be pretty relatable to people, fitness professionals tend to have that idea of tapping into energy, rest, recovery, replenish, much more effectively than what we would think of as like our corporate athletes.
Yeah.
So I often use that as an example, trainers or people that are elite athletes or very in tune with their fitness habits, those habits and practices can be applied emotionally and cognitively, and in how we manage our attention and all that. So I think there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of us, we could learn from fitness professionals, how to apply some of their habits and practices into other areas of our lives. So being aware of, where are we exerting, where are we overexerting, and what do we need to do in that space to replenish and refuel. So I would encourage people to think about that, how about my emotional energy, my cognitive energy. Attention management is a huge challenge for people right now. We have so many signals and inputs and distractions and interruptions digitally, that I think people are feeling really depleted and particularly scattered and distractible. And part of that is, it isn't our fault.
Yeah.
Like, technology is bigger than us. So what we can do is look at, what are the external conditions we're creating for ourselves, and then managing my internal conditions so that I'm able to focus and self-regulate. I guess I would ask, what do you think your listeners, what do you think their greatest challenges in this space?
Well, so you hit on one of them. I was actually thinking about it as you were saying that, is that, partly, fitness professionals have had to put themselves on social media quite a bit, as a way to differentiate themselves, in the marketplace. That's, one of the great things about, social media. And look, it has many ills as well, but one of the great things is it's kind of democratized advertising to a certain extent in our industry. So
Right.
they're on these things, all of the time. And
Mhm.
so that coexists with the fact that most of the people that listen to this podcast, they're working with patients or clients, one-on-one during the day. And, they might go from, 8 to 5, or in some cases, 8 to 8 with a break in the middle of the day. And they need to have, or at least try to have, as much energy for the 8 a.m. person as the 7 p.m. person. So I think that those are some of the challenges. So I guess, I would turn that back around to you. And I would say, in terms of, how do you recommend to professionals that need to be on social media that they manage that constant stream of inundation from social media? And, how do you manage your energy, during the day, as you're trying to, have as much energy for the first person as the last person? Because that's a real challenge. I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little bit more about one of our strategic partners as a podcast. As many of you know, the Wellness Paradox is all about closing off the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness professionals and the medical community. And no organization does that better than the Medical Fitness Association. They are the professional member association for the medical fitness industry. Now, this is the industry that integrates directly with healthcare in many facilities throughout the entire country. The MFA is your go-to source for all things medical fitness. They provide newsletters, webinars. They even have standards and guidelines for medical fitness facilities. They do events around the entire country. And most importantly, they are one of the more engaging networks in the entire fitness industry. I personally have benefited from the network that I've developed through the Medical Fitness Association. And I highly recommend that all of you that are interested in solving the wellness paradox engage with the MFA. To find out more about the Medical Fitness Association, you can go to their website, medicalfitness.org. That's medicalfitness.org. Now back to today's episode.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's really the challenge of any kind of knowledge worker,
right,
as well, or entrepreneur or solopreneur. And I think it's even harder for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs that aren't having some ecosystem and structure offered for them. I think that makes it even more challenging. So what I would say is thinking about pace. It's really for any high achievers, and I'm guessing that most of your audience is just that, because that's who shows up to podcasts to try and learn and grow and develop and get better. Being reasonable about the expectations we set for ourselves is really important, because high achievers also sometimes can have excessively high expectations that aren't necessarily reasonable, and then that generates unnecessary distress. So a lot of mental health really is also about managing our level of stress. Healthy tension, healthy stress is great. It helps us get stronger. It helps us build confidence and grow and develop. Unnecessary distress is not. So even just looking at how we're spending our day and our lives and trying to separate what is the unnecessary distress that's showing up, and pacing and taking breaks, taking small breaks. I'm sure you've seen it's kind of everywhere now, the brain studies that are coming out of the impact of not taking breaks, and it really it's damaging to the brain, and it leads to constricted, restricted thinking. And even just taking small breaks throughout the day can make a big difference. So it's just remembering to do cognitive rest, just like we need physical rest. If we don't sleep, we'll literally die.
Yeah.
So our brains need breaks too. So I would say a challenge for all of us is managing our expectations, making sure they're reasonable, pacing. So if I'm exerting and going in fifth gear, whether it's in my workout or at work or in my business or with my family, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to account for that and then make sure that I'm building in proper right-sized amount of rest and recovery in second gear. And that pacing, I think, is really hard.
Yeah.
Like learning to operate in the third and fourth gear for high achievers, I think is challenging.
Yeah, that's almost what I was going to ask you, because the thing that comes up in my mind is the concept of boundaries. Like we all need boundaries to make sure we do stay, safe in all the endeavors that we undertake. And I think the fitness professionals listening to this, know that we don't have somebody who's never squatted before, put 315 pounds on the bar and try to squat it. We start them with their body weight and then go to a dumbbell. But I think the challenge, and I'll say this as an entrepreneur myself, who's owned several businesses. I've always, and I think the people that listen will also find this hard, is that how do you strike the balance between trying to achieve at a high level, but also not overshoot the mark? I feel like that's a very, very fine line, and one I know I've always personally struggled with, and I'm sure you hear this a lot. So I guess the more succinct question is, how do you still push and excel and succeed, but not overdo it to the point of your detriment?
I think that's the $1 million question right there.
It is, isn't it?
Like just enough. You want to do just enough so that it's not damaging. And, we all probably have a slightly different threshold there and different levels of stamina and what we're willing to tolerate and, values and understanding of what is important to us. So I think any self-awareness of understanding all those things and knowing we get to decide. We get to decide what's the most important thing, and we get to make choices, and those choices can be hard. So boundary setting is super important. It might be, I'm saying no to this incoming request. It could be an emotional boundary. But that's challenging. Setting boundaries with people in particular is hard because we don't want to disappoint. We don't want to disappoint. We don't want to hurt people's feelings yet. And if I'm not managing my own mental and physical health, nobody's going to do it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned values, and I want to stay on that for a second. I sometimes think that people don't take a step back and actually really codify kind of what their values are. And I've always found that's been a very helpful thing for me. I feel like, they almost act as a compass for me to orientate myself, through life. So with the people that you work with, how do you have them look at values? What role does values play? Do you use values exercises? Talk about that for a second, because I feel like that's something it's so foundational, but it's often overlooked.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to call out, especially because there's so much noise out there and so much static about what we should be doing and what success should look like and what effectiveness should be, that really social media can be a super positive platform until it's not.
Yeah.
And so, that's up to each of us in terms of what relationship we want to have with it. But the values exercises I almost always use in coaching because that should guide everything. What is the most important thing to my client? What is the most important thing to you? Because what I think doesn't matter.
Right.
And so how to do that? I mean, it's a verb. I think it's just like a continual reflection that we get to come back to, because different seasons of life, our values can change. Some will change, some will adapt, some won't. But really, in short, it's looking at a whole bunch of lists, a big long list of values, and then honing it down to pick your top 3 to 5. Getting to 10 to 15 is pretty easy. Doesn't take too long, but really honing that down to 3 to 5 is challenging. And it does require some stillness and calm, and to internally go inside ourselves and figure out what truly is the most important thing to us. And then with that information, yes, we use that as a compass to make life decisions or as a mental model, and to challenge ourselves to see if we are in alignment with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can end up with a value on the list that we think we should have, but we're not necessarily living in alignment with. And then we can understand, like, is that actually a value, or is that a value I was conditioned to feel like I think I should have? And then how we line our lives up, if we are living in reasonable alignment with our values, that can help us lean into thriving and flourishing.
Yeah. Yeah. So such a, I think an important exercise. And it's something that when I have coached clients on health behavior change, it's a tool that, I have used there. How do you orientate your health behavior changes to your values? If you value family, well, being healthier allows you to spend more active time with your family. So I think it's a very interesting tool. Karen, I know there's pretty much everything in your book that can apply to the fitness professionals who are listening can also apply to the clients and the patients that they work with. But I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that you would say to our audience in terms of the lessons that your book teaches that, maybe within their scope of practice, they could carry over to their work with their clients. Because in a lot of cases, and the fitness professionals that are listening to this will shake their heads at this. Sometimes we turn into like de facto, psychologists for our clients, even though it is grossly outside of our scope. We're with them 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week. We talk to them. So is there any particular things that you want to point out from the book or even from your experience that you think fitness professionals could take away for the work they do with their clients and patients?
Yes, what's coming up for me is just the power of the role that you can play in someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it isn't just about fitness.
Yeah.
It isn't just about getting stronger or getting in shape. Like, that idea of being present with people and creating that safe place of trust that they're able to share with you and talk with you. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what we need. This is what we need is the power of connection and social fabric, and people want to be heard. They need to be heard. And, even though you're the fitness experts, you can't do it for them, but you're on the journey with them. And I think that's just really powerful. And I speak a lot about this idea of accompaniment, which is a little more of like a horizontal way of looking at it rather than, you're the expert and they're the patient, or I'm the expert and they're the client, but leaning into this idea that we are all in this together. Yeah. And whether it's their fitness path or a recovery path or the path of mental health or healing from mental illness or healing from a physical injury, like that space that you hold for people is so impactful. So that power of accompaniment is just this idea that we're alongside one another. We're in it together. I'm not going to be able to fix it all for you. I don't have a magic bullet, nor do you. There isn't one equation or algorithm that is going to equal fitness for everybody. So, whether it's fitness or mental health, like, we're all unique. And we all need different ingredients to kind of put together our own physical, mental health, flourishing recipe. But whether it's fitness or mental health or psychology, or teaching somebody how to box, whatever the craft is, that idea of being present and connected with people, I just think it has compound impact.
Yeah, well said. And well said. Well said.
Yeah. And I hope that, your listeners can lean into finding the purpose in that.
Yeah.
Just really powerful. Like, you're changing lives, even if, regardless of where people are in their fitness journey, I think it really can be life-changing.
Yeah. This idea of connection, accompaniment, I think is so important. And I thought of this a lot lately, in the context of AI. And, the fact that, probably AI, if it can't already do it in short order, will be able to write the perfect exercise program for you, right? Like, it can write the program, but AI is not going to be there to accompany you. You're not going to connect with AI. And so I think that's even a more important commodity, than it was, that ability to connect and accompany somebody, than it was, 15, 20 years ago, where people didn't have access to the knowledge. Now, the knowledge exists. Like if you want a great workout, you can find it somewhere. But that personal connection, that is at the heart of, I think, what, anyone in the allied health space, that therapeutic alliance is just so important.
Absolutely. Well, and we know now connection is the greatest predictor of longevity.
Yes. Indeed.
So that applies to everyone, everywhere, in all businesses, organizations, functions, professions, everything. And it's actionable. Like you can change a life today. So yeah, AI is great, but I do the humanity. AI will not replace the humanity piece of it.
Amen to that. If you were to take all the things that you talked about in your book and just your experiences in general in what you've done in your career, and you can kind of, maybe give the audience one take-home lesson from our conversation. And maybe it's something you've already said, but what would that be for you? If you want people to remember, if you remember nothing else from our talk, remember this. What is it?
Well, the one thing would be you are not alone in the struggle, because we all have those moments that it seems like everyone else is killing it. It seems like it's easy for everyone else, and we all have our struggle. It's like human pain and suffering. None of us are immune to it. So that's the one thing I would say. And from a practical standpoint, in the realm of the promotion of flourishing or thriving in whatever area of well-being, is thinking of like the progress principle. Small things matter. Doing a 1-minute meditation over time is way better than zero.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, your listeners deal with that in the fitness realm, is we make it too big and then we don't do the thing. Whether I'm going to wait till I can, run 5 miles, well, just walk around the block. I mean, that progress principle, when it's fostering our mental health or physical health, it really does make a difference. So incremental small steps can add up.
Absolutely.
They're sustainable. Yeah.
So Karen, where can people go if they want to find out about all the great work you're doing? Where's a great place to find your book? We'll link up to all this on the show notes page, but I just want to make sure the audience hears it just in case they don't make their way to the show notes page.
Yes, great. Thank you. So my website is drkarendahl.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, mostly LinkedIn. So, and my books are Amazon or anywhere that sells books. Awesome.
And, we will link up to all of that on the show notes page. Karen, this has been a great conversation. And before I let you go, we're going to end the podcast with the question I always end the podcast on. And I always enjoy asking this question to people who are kind of in the broader, allied health space, have it be physicians or psychologists, which is, the wellness paradox, as I view it, is this trust, interaction, and communication gap that has evolved between fitness professionals and our medical community. From your perspective, if you give the fitness professionals one piece of advice to close off that gap, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to ask you that question when we get offline. My advice is, because my lens is as a psychologist, my advice is remain curious. All of us coming to the world of health or illness or pathology or clinicians or, whatever, just remain curious about how all the practitioners are coming to the table.
Yeah, I think remain curious is a great answer to many questions and a good maxim for life. Karen Dahl, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Karen as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a huge difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 106. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops in 2 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next, please be well.